In the second half of the 1930s, the Regia Aeronautica, Italy's Royal Air Force, was expanding at a brisk pace. Its main striking force was made up of medium bombers, and those bombers had a distinctly Italian character. Unlike most other major powers, Italy's medium bomber force was dominated not by twin-engine designs, but by three-engine aircraft. SIAI led the way, where designer Alessandro Marchetti created the S.81 Pipistrello in 1935 and the S.79 Sparviero in 1936. Both aircraft were state-of-the-art for their time, and the Sparviero, when it first appeared, was considered the fastest bomber in the world. But technology never stands still, and by January 1938, the General Directorate of Production and Supply, the DGCA, had drawn up requirements for a new standard bomber. This aircraft was expected to reach a top speed of 530 kilometers per hour, carry a bomb load of 1,000 kilograms, and have a range of 2,600 kilometers. SIAI's designers responded quickly, submitting proposals for a major redesign of the Sparviero as early as February. The main changes, tried out on one of the 8th series S.79s, MM-21-493, included a twin-tail layout that eliminated blind spots for the dorsal gunner and new Fiat A74 RC38 engines in place of the old Alfa Romeo AR126 RC34s. The aircraft, given the provisional designation Aero 120, made its first flight on July 17, 1938, and over the next 3 months went through a full program of flight testing. The plan was for the production bomber to receive the designation SM.79, but at the end of 1938, the DGCA canceled the standard bomber competition. The military had been impressed by the flight characteristics of the new CRDAZ-1007 BIS bomber, and as far as they were concerned, the matter was settled. CII pressed on with the bomber as an internal company project. The aircraft was still being treated as a major redesign of the S-79, and the main focus was finding a more powerful engine setup. By August 1938, proposals had been prepared for 2 variants, one with domestic air-cooled Piaggio P11 RC40 engines rated at 1,000 horsepower, and another with German liquid-cooled Daimler-Benz DB601AA/BB engines, rated at 1,175 horsepower. Carrying the same payload of 4,200 kilograms, the first variant offered a calculated top speed of 480 kilometers per hour, and the second, annoncé 510 kilometers per hour. In early August, both preliminary designs were sent to the DGCA and the design committee. On September 14th, the DGCA presented its conclusions to the Chief of the General Staff, recommending the variant with Italian engines. During this period, the new bomber went through several name changes in the official paperwork: SM-89, S-79 BES, SM-84, and SM-89 again. It wasn't until early 1940 that the name was officially fixed as SM-84, the designation it carried when it entered service. 2 prototypes were planned to work out the new bomber's design. On September 28, 1939, CIAI's management proposed using airframe MM-21-493 to speed things up, replacing its Fiat A74 engines with Piaggio P11s. If the proposal was approved, the company committed to delivering the prototype within 40 days, and promised serial production could begin by spring 1940 at a rate of 25 aircraft a month. Then in October 1939, the DGCA issued the first contracts for the new bomber to CIAI, 181 aircraft, and AUSA, 38 aircraft. Later, though, these contracts were canceled and replaced with new ones for 151 and 32 aircraft respectively. The dorsal hump that was a hallmark of the S-79 was gone on the new aircraft, replaced by a turret with a full field of fire. The SM-84 also carried much heavier armor. The S-79 had almost none at all, and self-sealing fuel tanks. The airframe remained a mixed construction, wooden wing and metal fuselage. Defensive armament was 4 12.7mm machine guns, 1 in the upper turret, 1 in the ventral position, and 1 at each side window. Maximum bomb load reached 2,000 kilograms. There was no dedicated SM-84 prototype. The first production aircraft, MM-22-395, served as one. Its registration was later changed to MM468 since Italy traditionally used three-digit numbers for experimental aircraft. This plane made its maiden flight on June 5, 1940. Further testing revealed that the new engine installation was actually worse than the old one, and the insufficient tail surface area combined with high wing loading, which had jumped from 135 to 210 kilograms per square meter compared to the S.79 due to the increased takeoff weight, created a whole host of handling problems in flight and during takeoff. With a payload of 4,200 kilograms, the aircraft could only manage 455 kilometers per hour, 25 short of what the designers had promised. The engines came with a whole laundry list of problems: fuel pressure drops and overheating during takeoff and climb. But these problems were written off as normal growing pains, and serial production continued, along with ongoing attempts to improve the aircraft. For instance, on the 99th production example, MM22493/MM482, they tried out Piaggio P11 bis RC40 engines, the same power output as the P11 RC40, but reworked for better reliability. Eventually, some production aircraft were built with these engines. This variant was designated SM.84 bis. The first SM.84s were delivered to the Regia Aeronautica on Christmas Day, December 25, 1940. Delivery of the first SIAI production batch was completed in January 1942. On the 20th of that same month, SM-84 bis airframe M23-975 first flew, the first example from the second batch of 50 aircraft ordered from SIAI. Aircraft from this batch were delivered by early May. Between June and October 1942, the company delivered 51 aircraft of the third series, MM24559 through 24609, all belonging to the SM-84 bis variant. The last SIAI series, the fourth, numbered 23 examples, MM24638 through 24661, the first of which flew on November the 25th, 1942. A USA built two more batches. The first was 32 aircraft, MM22757 through 22788, the last 8 belonging to the SM-84 bis variant, and the second was 20, MM20700 through 24719. In total, 307 SM-84 and SM-84 bis aircraft were built. One example, MM22496/MM484, was fitted with underwing air brakes for use as a dive bomber, but this modification was never put into production. The SM-84 TUR was a one-off, a single airframe MM22497/MM485, fitted with Piaggio P19 engines rated at 1,500 horsepower and an enlarged wing. In 1944, already under German control, engineers experimented with new engine combinations. A central Alfa Romeo AR-131 paired with outboard AR-128s, or a central AR-135 with outboard AR-126s. In the Regia Aeronautica, the SM-84 was seen primarily as a torpedo bomber. The first aircraft of this type went to the 1st Torpedo Training Unit, the NAS, based at Gorizia Airfield. There, crews tested the new aircraft as a torpedo platform. Then, in February 1941, the 41st Independent Bomber Group, 204th and 205th Squadrons, which had previously flown Z-1007s, began transitioning to the SM-84 at Littoria Airfield. In spring, it was the turn of the 36th Bomber Stormo, the Italian equivalent of a wing, which received its first SM-84s in May 1941 and completed the transition by August. By then, its two groups, the 108th, 256th, and 257th Squadrons, and 109th, 258th, and 259th Squadrons, based at Bologna Borgo Panigale, had 28 SM-84s on hand, but only 19 of them were fully combat-ready. While the 36th Stormo was working up on the SM-84, the 41st Group had already taken them into combat. On May 5, 1941, it deployed at full strength 12 SM-84s and 4 S-79s, to Gdura Airfield on the island of Rhodes. The crews flew their first combat mission on May 13th, an unsuccessful search for naval targets in the Aegean Sea. 3 days later, the 204th Squadron bombed Nicosia Airfield on Cyprus. On May 17th, SM.84s used torpedoes for the first time, though without success. The torpedoes launched at a British tanker all missed. The 41st Group had a busy May 20th. Some of its aircraft supporting the German assault on Crete toward Heraklion bombed enemy troop concentrations near Aeropetra and in the southeastern part of the island. Others tried to torpedo attack Force C of the British Mediterranean Fleet. Cruisers Naiad and Perth escorted by 4 destroyers. However, the ships maneuvered effectively and avoided all hits. The following morning, Force C, now joined by the cruiser Calcutta, was attacked again by aircraft from the 41st Group. This time the strike was combined. 3 SM-84s were to bomb the ships while the rest attacked with torpedoes. But once again, it was a failure. The cruisers and destroyers threw up intense, well-coordinated anti-aircraft fire that had a lot to do with the attack's failure, damaging 3 SM-84s in the process. On May 23rd, aircraft from the 41st Group flew several sorties searching for enemy ships. And on the 24th, aircraft from the 204th Squadron twice bombed the Castelli area, in western Crete, where Greek forces were still holding out. On the morning of May 25th, this squadron was again hitting ground targets near Aeropetra. That same day, a pair of SM-84s set out on a long-range reconnaissance mission to the Egyptian coast. The flight turned into a disaster. Caught in a rainstorm and disoriented, the aircraft nearly ran dry and barely made it to the Turkish coast on fumes, making forced landings there. One belly-landed, the other came down on its wheels. The crews were interned. The Turks tried to fly the intact aircraft to Ankara, but they wrecked it on landing. On the afternoon of May 28th, 7 SM-84s from Rhodes, along with other aircraft, S-79s and Z-1007s, again attacked British ships. This time their target was Force B, 3 cruisers and 6 destroyers, heading for Crete to evacuate troops. During the attack, the cruiser Ajax and the destroyer Imperial were both damaged. After the fighting on Crete ended on June 1st, the 41st Group took a break from operations. The aircraft, battered over the preceding weeks, needed serious maintenance. A month later, on July 2, 1941, SM-84s bombed Paphos Akrotiri Airfield on Cyprus. On July 4th, the target was the port of Famagusta. On the 7th and 10th, Nicosia Airfield. On July 12th, the 41st Group's aircraft again hit Famagusta. On August 4th, Nicosia. On the 7th, Famagusta. Then came the reconnaissance grind, weeks over the eastern Mediterranean, frequently reaching as far as the Egyptian coast near Alexandria and Mersa Matruh. On October 3rd, SM-84s appeared over Cyprus for the last time, bombing Paphos Akrotiri Airfield. And on October 12th, the 41st Group returned to Italy, to Lecce Airfield. On July 8, 1941, the 282nd Independent Torpedo Squadron began its transition, receiving 5 SM-84s at Latoria Airfield. Next came the 7th Bomber Stormo, based at Novara Cameri and comprising the 4th and 25th Groups. It completed the transition by the end of summer. The 36th Stormo, having switched its role from bomber to torpedo, was declared combat ready and ordered to redeploy to Sardinia. On September 3rd, 14 SM-84s of the 108th Group flew from Bologna to Decimomanu, and on the 20th, the same number of aircraft from the 109th Group followed. The 36th Stormo's first combat assignment was to take part in the air-sea operation against the Halbird Convoy, an attempt to stop a supply run from Gibraltar to Malta. Besides the 36th Stormo, which by then had 21 operational SM-84s, 3 more aircraft of the same type from the 282nd Independent Squadron also participated, having redeployed from Gerbini to Cagliari Elmas in Sicily. On September 27th, the British convoy was spotted, and around noon, Colonel Seidel, commander of the 36th Stormo, led a 6-ship formation of SM-84s from the 109th Group toward the target. The second wave, also of 6 aircraft, was led by Major Burri. The third strike wave from the 108th Group launched with only 5 aircraft instead of 6. One had been damaged during takeoff. The whole attack was thrown together in haste with no coordination between strike groups, including the SM-84s from the 282nd Squadron. On their way to the enemy ships, the aircraft had to fly through a rainstorm, which threw the formation into disarray. Major Bury's 6-ship group ended up in front. They were the first to meet the Fiat CR-42 escort fighters, and around 1300 hours near Galita Island, 38 kilometers north of Tunisia, they spotted the British ships. The attack fell apart. The torpedo bombers couldn't settle on a primary target because the British ships were split into 2 groups. Warships were the priority targets, but they had no intention of making things easy for the Italian aircrews, throwing up a fierce barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Fulmar fighters scrambled from the carrier Ark Royal, which was escorting the convoy. Over the next 30 minutes, the 36th Stormo was torn apart. First to be shot down was 2nd Lieutenant Morelli's aircraft, caught by fighters from 808 Squadron. Captain Rodolo, commander of the 257th Squadron, went in to attack the battleship Nelson, but his plane was hit by flak and crashed into his wingman, Lieutenant Barrow's aircraft. Both SM-84s went down. Major Bury and 2 wingmen got through the flak and dropped their torpedoes, claiming 1 hit on a cruiser. From the second wave, led by Colonel Seidel, only 2 aircraft managed to aim and release their torpedoes. The SM-84s of Seidel, Captain Tomasino, commander of the 258th Squadron, and Captain Verna, commander of the 259th, were all shot down. The Italians did manage to land 1 torpedo hit on the bow of the battleship Nelson, forcing her to return to Gibraltar and then to Britain for repairs that lasted until May 1942. But the 36th Stormo paid dearly. 6 aircraft and 32 crew members lost. From all the downed SM-84s, only 1 radio operator survived, rescued by a British destroyer. The 36th Stormo was later awarded the Gold Medal for Military Valor for this action, a decoration its successor unit still carries today. The destruction of the 36th Stormo sent shockwaves through the high command. On October 2, 1941, the air commands in Sardinia and Sicily were asked to report on how well the SM-84's armor was actually holding up. The deployment of the 7th Stormo into combat was postponed due to the need to upgrade the SM-84's navigation equipment. To this end, its 25 aircraft, including 18 fully combat-ready, were transferred from Cameri to Littoria. And since deliveries of SM-84s from SAE and AUSA continued on October 17th, the 32nd Stormo, based in Bologna and comprising the 38th and 89th groups, received orders to transition to this type of bomber. The 36th Stormo and the 282nd Independent Squadron, meanwhile, continued operations. On October 23rd, a 4-ship formation from the 36th Stormo, led by Lieutenant Colonel Diaz, attempted a torpedo attack on enemy vessels near Galita Island. Every torpedo missed, and 1 SM-84 sustained heavy damage from anti-aircraft fire. But their luck turned the next day when a patrol in the same area paid off. A pair of SM-84s, despite opposition from Gladiator fighters, managed to sink the transport Empire Guillemot, 5,270 gross registered tons. On November 9th, a pair of aircraft from the 282nd Independent Squadron attacked Force K, 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers, southeast of Malta, sailing under cover of Hurricane fighters. The torpedo bomber pilots, Lieutenants Cristiani and Venturini, reported damaging a Leander-class cruiser, but British records show no ship took any damage. Force K, based on Malta, posed a serious threat to Italian shipping between the mainland and Libya, making its destruction a top priority. Between November 12th and 20th, a pair of aircraft from the 282nd Squadron, pilots Marini and Cristiani, made 3 attempts to bomb ships of this force at anchor in Valletta Harbor. The flights were staged from Catania. The attacks were carried out from high altitude using 1,000-kilogram bombs. Bombs that heavy were rarely used by the Italian Air Force. But these strikes produced no results. At sea, however, the SM-84s had more luck. On November 14th, a pair of aircraft from the 256th Squadron, led by Major Bury, attacked a transport flying a French flag near Galita Island. The Italians torpedoed her anyway. 1 torpedo hit, and the ship went down. She turned out to be the British Empire Defender, 5,650 gross registered tons sailing under a false flag. In late November 1941, 6 SM-84s from the 109th Group redeployed to Pantelleria, from where they continued operations against shipping. Returning from one of these missions, a pair of aircraft was supposed to land at Tripoli for refueling, but their own allies, German anti-aircraft gunners, opened fire on them regardless. One SM-84 was damaged as a result. The crew managed to make a forced landing near Zanzur. On November 29th, a pair of aircraft from the 282nd Squadron, pilots Marini and Mayer, spotted the cruisers Ajax and Neptune at sea, heading for Malta with 2 destroyers to reinforce Force K. The Italians dropped their torpedoes, reporting a probable hit on one of the cruisers upon their return. In reality, both torpedoes missed. After this operation, the 282nd Squadron was redeployed from Gerbini to Castelvetrano. On December 18, 1941, a trio of SM-84s from the 259th Squadron targeted Force K, which was escorting the tanker Breckenshire, loaded with fuel, to Malta. The strategic nature of the cargo meant the ships had solid air cover from hurricanes of 185 Squadron. The lead aircraft, flown by Major Gastaldi, was shot down, and the remaining torpedo bombers failed to hit their targets. Then, on December 22nd, a pair of SM-84s from the 258th Squadron torpedoed a large steamer near Cape Bon. The crews observed torpedo hits and a sinking target, but British sources do not confirm the loss of any vessel in that area on that day. By the start of the new year, things looked pretty bleak for SM-84 units. The 41st Group, after returning from Rhodes, had been re-equipped with Z-1007 bis aircraft. The 282nd Independent Squadron had only 3 operational aircraft, while the 36th Stormo had 14 to 15 combat-ready SM-84s. The 283rd Independent Torpedo Squadron, which flew S-79s, received 3 SM-84s as reinforcements. At the same time, on January 3, 1942, the 89th Group of the 32nd Stormo, which had never even tested its SM-84s in combat, received orders to convert back to S-79s. The 7th Stormo was in decent shape, and it had 34 aircraft. After completing its training cycle at Latoria, the unit returned to Novara Cameri and received orders to await further instructions. The wait lasted until April 24, 1942, when the 4th Group under Major Rivalta, fully equipped with SM-84 Bez aircraft, was ordered to redeploy to Siaka to take part in another round of bombing Malta. The aircrews of the 25th Group, for their part, headed to Gorizia to train on the new Crete torpedoes at the 1st Torpedo Training Unit. SM-84 combat activity in the spring of 1942 was minimal. It came down to a handful of episodes. On March 7th, for instance, 3 aircraft from the 257th Squadron flew a long-range mission over the western Mediterranean, trying to find and attack enemy ships returning to Gibraltar. The search came up empty. Worse still, the aircraft ran out of fuel and were forced to land in Algeria. On April 9th, aircraft from the 36th Stormo took part in a bombing attack on the cruiser Penelope, but didn't land a single hit. On May 12th, the 4th Group began raids on Malta. That day, 3 SM-84s from the 14th Squadron hit Takali airfield alongside Luftwaffe Ju 88s. The raid damaged several structures and wrecked 2 aircraft on the ground, but Spitfires from 603 Squadron shot down Lieutenant Vaca's aircraft and damaged 2 other SM-84s. On May 15th, 3 aircraft from the 4th Group again bombed Malta, St. Paul's Bay this time. There were no losses on this occasion. The escort, MC-202s from the 4th Stormo, kept the Spitfires at bay. The 4th Group's raids on Malta continued on May 25th, May 30th, June 3rd and 9th, and July 1st and 2nd. In all cases, the group sent small numbers of aircraft, typically 3, operating alongside bombers from other units under heavy escort from German and Italian fighters. The main targets were the runways and taxiways at Mikaba and Ta Venezia airfields. They managed to avoid losing aircraft, though SM-84s frequently returned to base riddled with holes, often with wounded crew aboard. This relative luck ran out on July 4th. That day, a trio of SM-84s, as usual, was carrying a load of 100-kilogram bombs toward Mikaba. But the Maquis from the 51st Stormo assigned as escort were late this time, making it easy for 10 Spitfires from 249 Squadron and the anti-aircraft gunners to pick them off. All 3 SM-84s were shot down. The entire crew of 1 aircraft was killed, and only 1 man survived from the second crew. The SM-84 played a notable role in the Battle of Pantelleria, also known as the Battle of Mid-June, an air-sea battle fought to stop Operation Harpoon, yet another British convoy run to Malta. To escort 6 transports, the British had committed the battleship Malaya, the carriers Eagle and Argus, plus cruisers, destroyers, and various smaller vessels. The fleet's air defense was provided by carrier-based Sea Hurricanes of the 801st and 813th Squadrons and Fulmars of the 807th Squadron. On the morning of June 14th, virtually every operational SM-84 from the 36th Stormo went in to attack the British formation. The first wave consisted of 9 aircraft from the 109th Group, the second 6 from the 108th. The crews reported 3 torpedo hits on British ships, but not a single one had actually found its target. Their own losses, however, were severe. 6 SM-84s didn't make it back to base. The following morning, SM-84 bis aircraft from the 4th Group at Siaka attacked the convoy, which by then was south of Pantelleria. 9 aircraft, flying in 3-ship formations, approached at high altitude and dropped 36 bombs, each weighing 160 kilograms. 2 transports, Birdwan and Kentucky's Harkeen, were damaged. The Kentucky was soon finished off in subsequent Italian and German air attacks. The attack was met by Spitfires from Malta's 126th and 249th Squadrons, which shot down 1 SM-84 BIs and seriously damaged another. 3 of its 5 crew members were killed on board. In July and early August, activity among SM-84 equipped units was minimal. The most noteworthy episode was perhaps the failed attack on July 15th, when 6 aircraft from the 36th Stormo bombed the fast mine layer Welshman heading for Malta, causing no damage. In August 1942, the SM-84 bis aircraft of the 32nd Stormo finally entered combat. 24 of the unit's aircraft were transferred to Sardinia to take part in intercepting the Pedestal convoy. This time, 14 transports heading for Malta were covered by the battleships Nelson and Rodney, plus the carriers Eagle, Victorious, and Indomitable, along with numerous smaller escort vessels. The carriers embarked 7 fighter squadrons, the 800th and 880th with Sea Hurricanes, and the 806th with Martlets on Indomitable, the 801st and 813th with Sea Hurricanes on Eagle, and the 809th and 884th with Fulmars, and the 885th with Sea Hurricanes on Victorious. The attacks on the convoy began on the morning of August 12th. S-79 torpedo bombers went in first, followed by the SM-84 Bs. 10 aircraft from the 38th Group under Major Orlando approached the target from different directions, each dropping 2 FFF motobomb, what the Italians called motor bombs. This weapon was deployed by parachute. After splashing down, a motor would start and the motor bomb would circle at up to 40 knots within a radius of 500 to 4,000 meters. Each motor bomb weighed 350 kilograms with 120 kilograms of explosive. Not a single motor bomb found its mark, but ships dodging them broke the convoy's formation, which made subsequent attacks easier. Along with other Italian and German aircraft, SM-84 bis torpedo bombers from the 89th Group also joined in, attacking at 11:30 in 2 5-ship formations led by Lieutenant Colonel Fata and Lieutenant Leonardi, under cover of RE-2001 fighters. The 89th Group's crews reported hits on a transport and several cruisers. On the afternoon of August 13th, 10 SM-84 bis, along with other aircraft, went searching for a British carrier supposedly located north of Bizerte, but the carrier was nowhere to be found. The next morning, 15 aircraft from the 32nd Stormo bombed Force X as the convoy's close escort, and in the afternoon, 5 more SM-84 BIs attacked the same force. The overall outcome of the air-sea battle is well known. Although the convoy suffered heavy losses, a carrier, 2 cruisers, and a destroyer sunk, along with 9 of the 14 transports. Malta still got through 32,000 tons of dry cargo and 15,000 tons of fuel. That was enough to keep the garrison fed and put the island's submarine base back in business. Alongside the 36th Stormo, the 7th Stormo also participated in the operations against Pedestal. However, its aircraft weren't targeting the convoy itself. They were hitting Malta's airfields, trying to neutralize the island's air power. On the night of August 11th through 12th, 2 SM-84s bombed Lucca airfield. On the night of August 14th through 15th, 5 aircraft from the 25th Group carried out a raid. They were intercepted by Beaufighter night fighters, which shot down 1 SM-84. Only the commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ravazzoni, survived. In late August 1942, the Regia Aeronautica Command ordered the 99th Group of the 43rd Stormo, based at Bresso, to convert to SM-84 BES. The unit soon received 11 aircraft, which were intended for use as long-range maritime reconnaissance planes. There were also plans to partially re-equip the 8th Bomber Stormo with SM-84 BIs. After the grueling battles of June and August, the 32nd Stormo was transferred to Gioia del Colle. It had 35 SM-84s on hand, including several transferred from the 36th Stormo. The latter was also pulled back for rest and replenishment to Pisa, retaining 16 aircraft. As of October 1st, the only SM-84 equipped unit in the Sicilian Air Command was the 7th Stormo, with 27 aircraft, all in the bomber configuration. In early November 1942, Allied activity in the Western Mediterranean surged. Operation Torch, the landings in North Africa, was in the works. Trying to counter this threat, the Italians took a number of measures. Among them was the return of the 89th Group to Sardinia on November 6th through 7th, to Villacidro and Millis airfields. Its aircraft, SM-84s equipped for carrying FFF motor bombs, went into action on November 12th when the landings were already underway. 5 SM-84s from the 229th Squadron, led by Captain Spezzaferri, attacked ships anchored off Bougie in Algeria. Fierce anti-aircraft fire and opposition from Spitfires of 242 Squadron prevented them from completing their mission. Lieutenant Ragucci's bomber was shot down, and on the way back to base, the aircraft of Captain Spezzaferri and 2nd Lieutenant Carda collided in midair. 2 men survived, including Spezzaferri. After this disaster, command pulled back on SM-84 operations. The losses were too high and the results too thin. The SM-84 pilots themselves were well aware of their slim chances of survival. When on November 30th, the 229th Squadron set out in daylight to bomb the port of Beaune, Captain Camera spotted a swarm of enemy fighters over the target and made the sensible call to turn back. The next day, the 89th Group went out at full strength. 10 SM-84s, led by Lieutenant Colonel Fada, attacked Beaune. They bombed port facilities and ships at anchor, causing considerable damage and starting fires. At the same time, the 228th Squadron bombed Bougie. The bombers were escorted by RE-2001 fighters, but they couldn't provide reliable protection. Over Beaune, the SM-84s were jumped by Spitfires from 81 and 242 Squadrons, which shot down 3 bombers, among them Captain Camera's, just 1 day after his decision to turn back. All the remaining bombers sustained varying degrees of damage. After landing, 3 SM-84s were declared beyond repair and written off. After the December 1st raid, the 89th Group handed its remaining SM-84s over to the 38th Group, then based at Alghero. In late December, the 32nd Stormo was brought back from Sardinia to mainland Italy, first to Gioia del Colle, then to Lecce. By the start of 1943, the 32nd Stormo had about 20 SM-84s at Lecce airfield. The 10th Stormo had 16 SM-84s and was preparing to redeploy from Sicily to Reggio Emilia. Replacing it, the 8th Stormo redeployed from Viterbo with about 20 aircraft. Another 24 SM-84s were listed in the 43rd Stormo at Novara Cameri and Leveldigi airfields. All told, the Regia Aeronautica's frontline units had roughly 80 SM-84 and SM-84 BIS aircraft. The planes were unpopular with both crews and commanders alike. It's telling that when at the end of 1942, a dozen bombers were needed for a propaganda film and had to be destroyed during shooting, the General Staff happily sacrificed SM-84s rather than S-79s. In the first months of 1943, SM-84 equipped units flew long-range maritime reconnaissance missions. By April, the number of these aircraft and frontline units had dropped to 60, including 34 fully combat-ready. The Regia Aeronautica Command decided to gradually withdraw the SM-84 from first-line service. When the Allies landed on Sicily in July 1943, SM-84s remained only in the 43rd Stormo's 98th and 99th groups, which had about 40 aircraft between them. The 98th Group, 11 aircraft, was urgently transferred from Lonate Pozzolo to Gioia del Colle, from where the SM-84s began flying night raids on the ports of Augusta and Syracuse, which had just fallen into Allied hands. On the evening of July 12th, for instance, 5 aircraft took part in such a raid. On the 15th, 4. On the 18th, 6. These missions were the SM-84's final combat operations. During them, the group suffered significant losses from both combat and technical causes. By the end of the second week of July, not a single serviceable aircraft remained. At the time of Italy's surrender on September 8, 1943, the 43rd Stormo headquarters and the 99th Group at Lonate Pozzolo had 18 SM-84s, while the 98th Group at Gioia del Colle had 12. The latter unit was based in southern Italy, which had avoided German occupation. Its aircraft were incorporated into the newly formed 2nd Transport Stormo, part of the Italian co-belligerent air force, the units that switched to the Allied side after the armistice. At the end of September 1943, this Stormo, alongside SM-75s, S-79s, SM-84s, and Fiat G-12s, had 6 operational SM-84s. In October, the 241st Squadron of the 132nd Group of the Stormo at Gioia del Colle, commanded by Captain Lee Destri, listed 7 SM-84s, but only 2 were operational. Over the following months, thanks to the efforts of repair crews combing southern Italian airfields, several more SM-84s were brought back to service. Some of these aircraft also ended up in the 1st Transport Group. At the end of 1943, the 241st Squadron, with 7 SM-84s, was based at Lecce Galatina, and its main duties were liaison and transport flights to Sicily. In January 1944, the SM-84 fleet in this squadron grew to 8 aircraft, and aircraft of this type also appeared in the Sardinian Air Command. When in early July 1944, the 132nd Group was re-equipped with Martin Baltimore bombers, the transport 240th and 241st Squadrons were transferred to the 98th Group. Its fleet consisted mainly of about 20 S-79s, and there were never more than 6 or 7 SM-84s among them. At the end of 1944, the 241st Squadron was redeployed to Rome Centocelle. During this period, it had 5 to 6 SM-84s, but typically only 2 or 3 were serviceable. All told, co-belligerent Italian SM-84s logged 1,528 flight hours in transport and training operations through May 8, 1945. After the war ended, SM-84s continued to serve at the Bomber and Transport Aviation School at Frosinone and with the communications flight of the Sicilian Air Command, among other places. As of March 1, 1947, 6 aircraft of this type were still in service. The last of them flew until 1949. SM-84s left behind in German-controlled Italy after September 1943 were pressed into limited transport service by the Luftwaffe and the Italian Social Republic's Air Force. The exact number of aircraft operated by the Germans is unknown, but in 1944, the CI plant at Vergiate repaired at least 11 SM-84s for the Luftwaffe. Slovakia received 6 or 7 SM-84s in 1943. Some sources put the number at 10. In the summer of 1943, they served with the 43rd Squadron on the Eastern Front, flying combat missions over the Kuban bridgehead. By the time the Slovak national uprising began in August 1944, only 2 SM-84s remained in service, but they weren't used by the insurgents. L'aereo sbagliato, the wrong airplane. That's what Italian airmen called the SM-84, and they were right. Designed to replace the S-79, it ended up worse than its predecessor and was retired before the plane it was meant to succeed. Brief technical description. The Psi-AI SM.84 was a tri-motor monoplane of mixed construction, serving as both torpedo bomber and level bomber. The wing was pure wood, low-mounted, fixed, 3-spar, and largely identical to the S-79's wing. The skinning was plywood and fabric. High-lift devices included automatic leading-edge slats and flaps. Roll control was provided by ailerons. 16 fuel tanks sat inside the wing, holding 3,220 liters in total. The aluminum alloy tanks had self-sealing liners rated against 7.7 millimeter rounds. Built around a welded steel tube frame, the fuselage was split into two sections, the upper part housing the crew cockpit and the lower part containing the bomb bay. The lower section had aluminum alloy skinning, the sides were fabric covered, and the upper section was plywood skinned. 2 additional fuel tanks of 355 and 415 liters could be fitted inside the fuselage, and a 2,500-liter tank could go in the bomb bay. Twin fins defined the tail assembly. The stabilizer and fin were built on a wooden framework covered in plywood and fabric. The elevators and rudders had a metal framework with fabric covering. Landing gear was of the tailwheel type. The main gear retracted hydraulically into the engine nacelles, leaving the wheels partially exposed. The tailwheel was non-retractable and steerable. Power came from 3 14-cylinder, twin-row, air-cooled Piaggio P11 RC40 radials, each producing 1,000 horsepower. On the SM.84 bis, these were replaced by P11 bis RC40s. The propellers were 3-bladed variable pitch types. An engine-driven GR1200 generator and 2 12-volt batteries handled electrical power. Radio equipment included an AR-8 receiver, an A320 transmitter, a B30 intercom system, and an RGM37 radio direction finder. For photography, a dedicated compartment on the left side of the mid-fuselage housed AGR61, AGR90, AL30, or APR-87 aerial cameras. The aircraft carried its bombs in an internal bay and on external hardpoints. The bomb bay could accommodate 2 500-kilogram, 3 250-kilogram, or 10 100-kilogram or 50-kilogram bombs, and in extreme cases, a single 1,000-kilogram bomb. The underwing pylons could carry 2 800-kilogram or 500-kilogram bombs, 4 250-kilogram bombs, or 8 100-kilogram or 50-kilogram bombs. In the torpedo bomber configuration, the torpedo was slung under the fuselage, offset to port. Defensive armament consisted of 4 12.7 mm Breda Safat machine guns with 350 rounds per gun. 2 were in side window mounts, 1 in the ventral position and 1 in a Lanciani Delta E upper turret mount. So that was the SM-84, an aircraft that was supposed to be the next step forward for Italian bomber aviation, and instead became a cautionary tale about rushing a design into production. It flew in some of the war's fiercest Mediterranean convoy battles, and the men who took it into combat paid a steep price for its shortcomings. Not every airplane gets to be a legend. Some just get to be a lesson. If you found this one interesting, hit the like button. It really does help the channel. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear which aircraft you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching.